The text came at 3 a.m. Sarah, I messed up. Really bad. Need to talk ASAP. I stared at my phone, already knowing what my brother had done. The crypto market had crashed overnight, wiping out billions in digital assets. And knowing Mike, he hadn't just lost his own money, he'd lost our parents' entire retirement fund. My name is Sarah Anderson, and at 32, I was about to deal with the fallout of my younger brother's biggest mistake yet. The next morning, Mike showed up at my apartment looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfectly styled hair was a mess, and his designer clothes were wrinkled, a far cry from the cocky crypto millionaire he proclaimed himself to be at Thanksgiving. How bad? I asked, letting him in. He collapsed onto my couch, running his hands through his hair. Everything. The whole investment, gone. $2.4 million, just vanished. I sat down slowly, the magnitude of what he'd done sinking in. Mom and Dad's entire retirement fund. He nodded miserably. The market crashed. The exchange went bankrupt. But there's still a chance, if we can access the private wallet where I transferred some of the coins. Some? I interrupted. How much? About half. But I lost the recovery phrase, and without it, he trailed off, looking at me hopefully. You're good with this tech stuff, right? Maybe you could help me figure out how to get it back. I almost laughed. Mike had always dismissed my work in cybersecurity as boring tech stuff, preferring to trust cryptocurrency influencers and get-rich-quick schemes. Now he wanted my help. Let me get this straight, I said, keeping my voice level. You took our parents' retirement savings, money they spent 40 years building, and put it into crypto without their knowledge. I was trying to help them, he protested. Their traditional investments were too slow. Crypto was supposed to multiply their money. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, needing a moment to control my anger. Through the window, I could see the small cafe where Mom and Dad used to take us for Sunday brunch. They'd worked their whole lives to build that retirement fund. Dad as a high school teacher, Mom as a nurse. 40 years of careful saving, gone because my brother thought he knew better. They don't know yet, do they? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mike shook his head. I was waiting for the market to recover. It always recovers, right? Not this time, I said, turning back to face him. The exchange you used is bankrupt, Mike. It's over. He jumped up, pacing my small living room. But the private wallet? If we can just recover those coins. I watched him, an idea forming in my mind. 2 weeks ago, when I first suspected Mike was in over his head, I'd done some digging. I found his wallet addresses, traced his transactions, and yes, I found the recovery phrase he thought he'd lost. But Mike didn't need to know that. Not yet. What exactly did you do with the recovery phrase? I asked. I wrote it down. I know I did. It was on a piece of paper in my apartment, but I can't find it anywhere. He ran his hands through his hair again, making it stand up even more. Sarah, please, you have to help me fix this. I thought about our parents, how Dad had put off retiring for 5 extra years to build their nest egg, how Mom still picked up extra shifts at the hospital even though her arthritis made it painful to stand for long periods. Okay, I said finally. I'll help, but we do this my way. Mike's face lit up. Really? You can recover the wallet? Maybe. But first, you need to tell Mom and Dad the truth. His expression fell. I can't? It'll kill them. They need to know, Mike, and it needs to come from you. He sank back onto the couch, looking smaller somehow. Will you come with me? I nodded, already planning the next steps in my head. We'll go tonight, but remember, this is just the beginning. If you want my help recovering those coins, you're going to have to do exactly what I say. That evening, we drove to our parents' house in silence. The modest 2-story home where we'd grown up looked exactly the same. Mom's flower garden blooming despite the early spring chill, Dad's old Volvo in the driveway. Mike's hands were shaking as we walked up to the door. I could have told him then that I had the recovery phrase, that half their money might still be recoverable. But he needed to face this moment, needed to see exactly what his reckless actions had done to the people who trusted him. Mom answered the door, her face lighting up when she saw us. What a surprise. Come in, come in. I just made coffee. Dad was in his usual spot in the living room, grading papers at his desk. Even after retiring, he still substituted at the high school a few days a week. To stay sharp, he said, though we knew it was also to help build their savings. Their savings. The thought made my stomach turn. Mom, Dad. Mike started, his voice cracking. I need to tell you something. They sat together on the couch, concern growing on their faces as Mike struggled to find the words. Finally, I stepped in. Mike made some investment decisions, I said gently, with your retirement fund. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. What do you mean? Mike couldn't meet their eyes as he explained. How he convinced their financial advisor to transfer the money, how he'd invested it all in cryptocurrency, how it had seemed like a sure thing until it wasn't. The silence that followed his confession was deafening. All of it? Dad finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Everything we saved. Mike nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry. I thought I could make it grow faster, give you the retirement you deserved. Mom's face had gone pale. But how will we? She couldn't finish the sentence. I watched as the reality of what Mike had done sank in. All their plans. The small condo in Florida they'd been looking at. The trip to Europe they'd been saving for. The comfortable retirement they'd worked so hard to build. Gone because my brother thought he knew better than 40 years of careful planning. There might be a way to recover some of it, I said carefully. About half the money was transferred to a private wallet. If we can access that wallet, those funds might still be there. Hope flickered across their faces, but I could see the trust was already broken. Mike had always been their golden child, the charming son who could talk his way out of anything. But not this time. I trusted you, Dad said, his voice heavy with disappointment. We trusted you. Mike broke down completely then, sobbing like I hadn't seen since we were kids. I'll fix this, he promised between tears. I'll work 3 jobs if I have to. I'll pay back every penny. But we all knew that was impossible. Even if he worked for the next 20 years, he couldn't replace what they'd lost. As we drove back to my place later that night, Mike was quiet, the weight of what he'd done finally sinking in. What do we do now? He asked as I parked outside my building. I thought about the recovery phrase stored safely in my encrypted files, about the plan I'd been forming since I first discovered what he'd done. Now, I said, you learn what it means to be responsible for your actions. If you want my help recovering those coins, you're going to have to earn it. How? First, you're going to sell your fancy car, your designer clothes, everything you bought with Mom and Dad's money. Every penny goes to them. He nodded quickly. Of course, anything. Second, you're going to move back home and help them. Dad shouldn't be working at his age, and Mom's arthritis is getting worse. They need support, not someone gambling with their future. Okay, he agreed, though I could see him struggling with the idea of giving up his downtown apartment and luxury lifestyle. And third, I continued, you're going to learn exactly how cryptocurrency works, not from influencers and Reddit posts, but from actual experts. I've arranged for you to take some courses at the Tech Institute where I teach part-time. He looked at me in surprise. You teach 2 nights a week, cybersecurity and blockchain technology. Maybe if you paid attention to what I do for a living instead of dismissing it as boring tech stuff, you wouldn't be in this mess. The jab hit home. Mike slumped in his seat, all his usual bravado gone. How long will it take? To recover the wallet? I smiled slightly. That depends on you. Show me you're serious about making things right, and we'll talk about the recovery phrase. As he got out of my car, I could see him processing everything, the magnitude of what he'd lost, the long road ahead to even begin making amends. Good. He needed to feel this to understand that actions have consequences. Because what he didn't know was that this was just the beginning of his lesson. The next few weeks tested Mike in ways he'd never experienced. True to his word, he sold his Tesla, his designer wardrobe, and moved back into our parents' house. His downtown apartment went on the market, though the real estate agent warned it might take months to find a buyer in the current market. I watched from a distance as he struggled to adjust to his new reality. Every morning, he drove Dad to the high school in our old family Honda, then spent his days helping Mom around the house and applying for jobs. His crypto trading friends stopped calling once word got out about his losses. Meanwhile, I kept the recovery phrase safely encrypted, waiting to see if Mike's transformation was genuine or just another act. One evening, about a month after the confession, I stopped by our parents' house to check on things. I found Mike in the kitchen, helping Mom with dinner. He was wearing an old t-shirt and jeans, a far cry from his usual designer outfits, The hospital called. Mom said as I sat down at the counter. They're offering me my old position back full-time. Mom, no, Mike protested. Your arthritis. We need the money, she said simply. Your father's substitute teaching salary isn't enough. I watched the guilt wash over Mike's face. This was exactly what he needed to see, the real consequences of his actions. Actually, I said, pulling out my laptop, I might have some news about that. They both looked at me expectantly. I've been doing some research, I continued, opening my files. And I think I found something interesting about the wallet where Mike transferred half the funds. Mike nearly dropped the plate he was drying. You found the recovery phrase? Not exactly, I said, though the phrase was sitting in my encrypted folder. But I found a trail. The wallet's still active, and the coins haven't been moved. Hope flickered across their faces. How much? Mom asked quietly. If we can access it? About $1.2 million at current market rates. Mike sat down heavily. Sarah, why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you weren't ready, I said firmly. You needed to understand what you've done first. And speaking of understanding, I pulled out a stack of papers. How are those blockchain technology courses going? He actually smiled. Better than I expected. I finally understand what a private key actually is and how wallet security works. I can't believe I was trading all that money without really knowing how any of it worked. That's exactly why I didn't tell you about this sooner, I said. Knowledge matters, Mike. Real knowledge, not just hype and FOMO. Mom looked between us. So you can get the money back. Maybe, I said carefully, but it's going to take time, and there are no guarantees. In the meantime, I pulled out another document. I set up a monthly transfer from my savings to help with expenses. Sarah, no, Mom protested. We can't take your money. You're not taking it, I insisted. I'm helping my family. That's what we do, right? Help each other. The right way, not by gambling with people's futures. Mike flinched at that, but nodded. She's right, Mom. Let us help. Over the next 2 months, I watched Mike continue to change. He found a job at a local tech company. Entry level, nothing glamorous, but honest work. He attended his blockchain courses diligently, actually engaging with the material instead of just looking for get-rich-quick schemes. Most importantly, he spent time with our parents, really seeing them for the first time in years. He drove Mom to her doctor's appointments, helped Dad with house repairs they'd been putting off, and slowly began to rebuild their trust. One evening, after a family dinner, Mike pulled me aside. I know what you're doing, he said quietly. What do you mean? The recovery phrase. You've had it all along, haven't you? I studied his face, looking for signs of his old entitled anger, but saw only tired acceptance. What makes you think that? He laughed softly. Because you're you, Sarah. You've always been 10 steps ahead of everyone else. You probably found it weeks before the crash, didn't you? I nodded slowly. I was monitoring your transactions. I saw where you moved the funds, and I found the phrase when I was going through your backup files. Why didn't you stop me before I lost the rest? Would you have listened? I asked. Or would you have accused me of being jealous of your success, like you did when I warned you about the risks? He had the grace to look ashamed. You're right. I wouldn't have listened. I had to learn the hard way. And have you? Learned? He gestured around the kitchen, at the dishes he'd just washed, the grocery list he'd made for Mom, the budget spreadsheet on his laptop. I think I'm starting to. It's not just about the money, is it? It's about responsibility, about thinking beyond yourself. I pulled out my phone and opened my encrypted files. The recovery phrase is yours, I said, showing him the screen. But think carefully about what you do with it. There's more at stake here than just money. He stared at the string of words that could restore half of what he'd lost, but didn't immediately reach for my phone. Can we wait? He asked. I want to finish my courses first, really understand what I'm doing. And maybe we should talk to a financial advisor about the best way to handle it. I smiled, feeling proud of my little brother for perhaps the first time in years. That, I said, sounds like a very good idea. 3 months later, we sat down with our parents and a financial advisor to discuss the recovered funds. The money wouldn't fully replace what was lost, but it would ensure they could retire comfortably, if modestly. Mike insisted that the funds be placed in a conservative investment portfolio, with him having no direct access. I've learned my lesson, he said when Mom tried to protest. Some things are too important to risk. As we left the advisor's office, Mike turned to me. Thank you, he said. Not just for saving the money, but for teaching me what it really means to take care of family. I hugged him, remembering the arrogant crypto bro he'd been just months ago. That's what big sisters are for, I said. To help you learn from your mistakes. Even when the mistake is $2.4 million? Especially then. Today, our family is stronger than ever. Mom retired properly, with Dad joining her. They never did buy that condo in Florida. But they seem content with their modest lifestyle and weekly family dinners. Mike continues to work at the tech company, where he's been promoted twice. He's paying back what he can to our parents, though they insist it's unnecessary. More importantly, he's found purpose in helping others avoid the mistakes he made, volunteering to teach financial literacy at the local community center. As for me, I keep the story of the recovery phrase as a reminder that sometimes the best way to help someone isn't to save them from their mistakes, but to help them learn from them. Last week, Mike brought his new girlfriend to family dinner. When she mentioned being interested in cryptocurrency, I watched him launch into a careful explanation of blockchain technology, investment risks, and the importance of doing thorough research. The most expensive lesson I ever learned, he told her, was that there are no shortcuts to building something worthwhile. Mom squeezed my hand under the table, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. The recovery phrase still sits in my encrypted files, a reminder of both how much we almost lost and how much we gained. But these days, its value isn't measured in cryptocurrency or dollars. It's measured in the lessons learned, the trust rebuilt, and the family bonds strengthened through crisis. As I watched Mike help Dad with the dishes later that evening, discussing responsible investment strategies and the importance of diversification, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best returns don't come from the market, they come from learning who you really are and what truly matters.